Good morning and welcome to New Heaven, New Earth. Last year, we did a program with Scienziato Bentov, a Boston-based researcher into the relationship between consciousness and the cosmos, and based upon a book which he wrote called Stalking the Wild Pendulum. This book has since become somewhat of a bestseller among people who are interested in the relationship between consciousness and the cosmos, and we wanted to, once again, get an opportunity this morning to speak with Mr. Bentov. Ben Bentov is a wonderful, loving, kind man, brave, courteous, true, all the other kind things you can say. The interesting thing about him is that he has, over the years, conducted research into consciousness. The subtitle of his book is The Mechanics of Consciousness, and what we want to try to talk about today is one aspect of it, and that is the evolution of consciousness. Ben, there's probably no theory that has had more impact on Western thinking than the theory of evolution that Darwin came up with in the mid-19th century. And ever since then, all of our thought has been along the ideas that somehow we have evolved as human beings to being who we are today. The question I want to ask you is, where do you see us now in that evolutionary development?
We can say that if we take Darwin's theories as being correct, then we know that we have evolved from the apes towards humans, and now we've finally come to a point where we're humanoid in shape, we have vertical spines, we're reasonably intelligent, we can push buttons on TV, drive cars, etc., etc. And what I'd like to do, I'd like to draw maybe a little diagram, but don't worry, it's not very scientific. Let me draw what is called a bell curve, which looks somehow like this. It's being used in describing random events. And the way this works is the following, that if we assume now, let's take a following situation. Take a little town that has maybe 1,000 people in it. And we have this great desire to find out what the average height of people in this town is. And therefore we go out with a yardstick and start measuring these people. Well, we find that a very small, very few number of people will be, say, 3 feet tall. And a very, very few of them will be maybe 7 or 8 feet tall. The bulk of the population will be right somewhere here. That is the average or mean height of these people would be about 5 feet and 6 or 8 inches, something like this. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what we find here is that this bell curve gives us a good picture of where most of the population is. That is what typifies a population. We can use this diagram also to describe evolution. The bulk of the population today is this intelligent, more or less intelligent biped, all right? And with a vertical spine, and who pushes the buttons on TV and drives a car, etc., etc. Now, there is some backthrow. That is, there are some people here in this area, very few people who are still gorilla-like. That is, they are hairy. They beat their chest when they see their neighbors and a few other things. And then we have other people who are here in this corner, very few of them, who are very highly developed, because we say that evolution is now pushing mankind in this direction, away from the gorilla types towards the very highly evolved people. At this point, we're here. What's going to happen maybe 1 million years from now, 500,000 years from now? This curve is going to shift. It's going to shift like this. That is, the bulk of the population will be very, very highly evolved. We have gone away altogether from the gorilla types, no more gorillas. And what we have here now is the average man is now the retarded person in evolutionary terms. The bulk of the population is extremely, very, very highly evolved. And the cutting edge of evolution here, these are very, very highly evolved people. We can't even imagine what kind of person that will be. He may not have a physical body at all. What's the habitat, so to speak, of this group here? Well, you just go out and you find them. They're all over the place. The habitat of this group here, what do you think? What do you think you find these people here?
I suspect that you would find them in universities. You'd find the people who are very bright, people who are in the leading edge of professions. That kind of thing. I mean, it's an intellectual thing, isn't it?
Well, I suggest that you find them in mental hospitals, in nut houses. And the reason for that is that these people, they live in a different reality, in a reality which is very changed, and few of them are adapted to live in this reality. So naturally, they can't function very well. So the only safe place, only good place for them would be the mental hospital, unless they can integrate their different view of reality with their daily lives. Now, if they can integrate it, then we have people like Newton, like Darwin, like Faraday. These are the so-called geniuses.
The thing that I'm not certain that we have talked about is, what is it that is evolving?
Let's put it this way. The nervous system is the thing that is evolving, and the nervous system is supported by a skeleton of bones and muscles and tissue, etc., etc. Now, the nervous system is that thing that gives us the picture of our realities. That is, our realities, that reality which you see all around you, the flowers and the chairs and the microphones and the teacup, is given to us by our senses.
Yeah.
We don't see light which is beyond UV and beyond infrared. We hear only a limited scale of vibrations, like, for instance, we hear anywhere from 52 to 20,000 maximum.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, all our senses are limited. So, with these limited senses, we naturally are seeing through a very narrow kind of tube or very narrow slit in the total reality there is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as you're evolving, what happens is that slit opens up more and more and more. So you see more and more of that reality, and we assume that we see different reality. They're not very different realities, but rather a very extended, broad view of one very large reality. The Bible mentions maybe 4 to 6 colors maximum.
Yeah.
That is what people saw just bare maybe 4,000 years ago. Nowadays, we see hundreds and thousands of colors. That is, our visual system has evolved.
Mm-hmm.
Our fellow mammals, like cows and horses, see only black and white. So this is one example of the evolution of the nervous system. The senses are an extension of our nervous system. Our eyes, our ears, etc., are an extension of our brain, so to speak.
Okay, so now, before you were talking about the people who were the mutants, either being in the mental hospitals or being geniuses.
Yeah.
These are people who have expanded perception, and hence they can see a reality which ordinary people at this stage of evolution are not able to see.
Correct.
What is the nature of that reality which they're able to see?
Well, that is classified as a non-physical reality sometimes. We can take an example, say, let's take a simple example. The family sitting at dinner table, and say there's a kid, maybe 15 years old, 16 years old, and he looks up and suddenly he says to his mother, "Hey, Ma, look at, there's our dead grandmother is standing in the corner." Mother looks around and says, "No, there's no grandmother there." And she says, "Well, kiddo, there's something wrong with you. You need help.
You're crazy."
So you're crazy. So she takes him off to the friendly neighborhood psychiatrist, and same thing happens. The psychiatrist will ask him, "Well, kiddo, what do you see?" Well, you'll see, "Well, don't you see, doctor, over there in the corner, don't you see this person standing there?" Well, the psychiatrist turns around, "No, there's no such thing." Well, and then psychiatrist says, "Oh, young fella, you're in troubles," and then he writes out a little prescription for Thorazine or electroshock or whatever, and pretty soon, in a matter of 2 weeks, kid is back in shape, very normal.
No longer sees the
No longer sees anything.
Yeah.
So the process has been reversed. This is called a psychotic episode or acute schizophrenic break or whatever it is.
And what you would say is that there's a good chance that that kid is seeing.
Very good chance that the kid has a spontaneous opening of his senses.
So that the evolution has been rushed up or hurried up?
Yeah. Now, this actually happens. There are techniques to do this. But the Eastern people, the yogis, have developed systems to do this, to push the nervous system rapidly. But it happens very often spontaneously without someone trying to do anything about it, and just happens. And then naturally, in the olden days, these kinds of things used to be called miracles.
Yeah.
And nowadays, there's no more miracles. Well, let's take this.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because you think of, what you call the spontaneous opening of expanded awareness.
Correct.
Right? I mean, that's sort of a lot of words to say something. But in an earlier time, it was called a miraculous occurrence.
Yeah.
Elevated consciousness.
Right.
A time of great revelation, of God speaking to you.
Now, take like this fellow, St. Paul, yeah? He's going or walking or riding to Damascus in the olden days. And suddenly this big ball of white light descends, and Jesus standing in the ball of light, and he says, hey, why don't you lay off of my people and stop doing whatever you're doing and all that? And he's very impressed, and he's even blinded, and he falls down, and one thing and another. But anyway, he makes it somehow to Damascus. And there he starts a big campaign, and he talks about his experience, the big public relations thing, and he got the thing going. He got the church built, and the Judeo-Christian ethic came out of this, and bingo, and all the things that, that come with this. So we've got something.
Yeah.
Now, suppose the same thing would happen, and this fellow, so St. Paul, say, is driving down on Route 128, yeah? Driving down.
Route 128 doesn't go to Damascus.
Well, it doesn't go to Damascus. It goes to
It goes to Dedham.
So then this fellow is driving, and suddenly this big ball of light descends in front of his windshield, and there's Jesus standing in front of him, and he gets very, very impressed, and his driving naturally gets kind of wobbly. And so, sure enough, there's a cop behind him, and he says, ooh, and gets him off to the side of the road. And he says, sir, may I have your license and registration and all that? And this fellow is so impressed, and he keeps babbling something about Jesus and all that. And the cop says, well, you must be driving under the influence, right? So he arrests him and takes him in the station.
Uh-huh.
Then what happens is that he comes to the station, and then they tell him, well, he still is under the influence, you see. So they call an ambulance and send him off to the mental hospital. So now the reception desk, they interview him, a very short interview, and the guy puts down in the logbook that the fellow came in with an acute psychotic or schizophrenic episode with religious overtones. That's it. And this is what we did to the miracle. So we took the miracle and we ground it down really to gray powder. So no more miracles.
Okay.
Everybody's complaining that during the Bible times, on every page of the Bible, you have a miracle or two, and now there's no miracles. This is what we're doing to the miracles. We're just flattening them out.
What is it that is evolving? Now, you talked about the nervous system evolving, right? But is there something else that is evolving that is able to be sensitive to this higher level of reality?
We have this notion of a soul. Most people won't talking about the soul. It's a kind of non-physical thing, it's highly theoretical. And so when you go to church, you take this soul out of the closet and polish it up a little bit, and then you go to church and you are one with your soul. Then you come back and put it back in the closet till next week. So that's about the idea of a normal person with a soul. But actually, that's not the case. I mean, we don't have souls, but it's just the other way around. A soul has us. So that is that thing that evolves, the permanent, eternal thing is the soul, and the body is a kind of disposable thing. That is, you use a body like a car for 80,000 miles, 100,000 miles, and you junk it, and that's it, you get another one. So it's the driver is the soul who uses the body for a while, and then he runs it into the ground, and he gets another one sooner or later.
And so it's the soul which is experiencing evolution, and not our personality, not our physical existences.
That is, the soul is the repository of information that we gather during a lifetime. Well, I'll tell you, maybe we should draw another diagram. Physical bodies are here, another physical body, another physical body, and this is Joe, and this is Jim, and this is Sarah, etc. Now, clearly, on the this is the physical level, yeah? Now, on this physical level, we are separate. You sit there, and I sit here, and we're all separate. Now, let's draw another level. This level is slightly higher, and let's call this the level of the soul, yeah? Well, there will be some mingling here. Let's draw this person as extending to practically infinity this way. Now look what happens. At the physical level, we're separate. And there's this much distance between us. Let's say that on the soul level, this person extends this much, and the other person gets slightly mixed in with him. That is, the souls are in a way in touch with each other. Okay, they overlap, these two lines. Now let's go now to a higher level, and let's call this, say, the level of the higher self, which is kind of a boss of that soul. There, what we find is that this fellow's higher self extends this much, and the other fellow's extends this much. There is more overlap between them. Right. On the very highest level, which is the high spiritual level, we are basically overlapping completely. Everybody is overlapping everybody else. In other words, everything and everyone is everywhere. In other words, we've become omnipresent. This is a state of highly spiritual perfected beings, or gods, you may call them. Okay?
Okay, and so that we exist on all of those simultaneously.
On all of those simultaneously,
So then,
but we're not aware of that.
In your view, then, if when we see each other as separate entities, that's only seen on one plane of reality.
Correct. And so whether we like it or not, we're all evolving towards godhood. But, you know, it takes eons, so don't hold your breath.
Is that the purpose of evolution?
Naturally. Because at that point, you start understanding how the system works. And one of the good things about the system is that the system wants to teach you about itself.
What does it want to teach
It's a good system.
Yeah? What does it want to teach you?
Well, if you are omnipresent and you're all-knowing, that is the state which the system wants you to be in. Because the system is an intelligence or information gathering system. And it's also freely distributing that information.
In your view, we all started off somewhere a long time ago in which there was sort of undifferentiated matter, which slowly, millions and millions and millions of eons, evolved until a very complex organism that we now call a human being. And it has a nervous system which we at this particular point in time understand as being sensitive to certain levels of reality through our eyes, our ears, our nose, other sensory perception. And that's sort of what we call material ordinary reality that enables us to drive cars and do our work every day. However, there is an evolutionary movement that will continue to push us beyond where we are today. And the thing which is going to be pushed is our soul, and that at some point we will have these experiences of elevated consciousness in which higher realities are not only seen but lived, and ultimately we come into perfection.
Whether we like it or not.
Yeah? Can we speed that up by doing it?
Yeah. Well, you use the meditative techniques which push the nervous system a lot faster than the normal evolutionary rate. Those techniques are available, but you don't need to do anything. It's going to happen anyway.
It's going to happen. What a view. It's a very big, bright view.
His full name was pronounced Itzhak Bentov, but to most people he was known simply as Ben. Ben would usually start his talks by saying, "Now we will talk about all there is, from atom to cosmos, from humanhood to godhood, no less." And he would talk about the nature of reality and our place in it, and his own model of the universe, and his personal experiences in expanded states of consciousness. And finally, at the end, the ultimate question: who runs the show? Ben had a tremendous sense of humor and a capacity to explain very complex ideas in a very simple and understandable way. And he illustrated his 2 books with his own cartoon-like drawings. Niels Bohr has said, "Some things are so serious that one can only laugh about them." Ben called himself a nuts and bolts man, a plumber. He was trained as a mechanical engineer, and somewhere along the way, he started meditating and his consciousness opened up so that reality began to be perceived by him in 2 ways, 2 kinds of knowledge: the linear, scientific, objective knowledge, and the direct, intuitive, inner knowledge of a mystic. And the combination of these 2 gave him a unique and a very unusual perspective on the nature of reality. First of all, he saw reality as a hologram. It's a totality in which every part is related to every other part, and they're all interdependent. And this hologram he perceived as vibratory in nature. In other words, as he said, it's an off and on reality, and we are only part-time here. It's an oscillating field. And it may appear to us as a continuous reality, whereas in fact, it's like a film composed of separate frames. He looked at reality as a whole as consciousness itself. Consciousness in the state of evolution, of unfolding itself to know itself. And there is nothing outside it. So that the physical reality, the manifest world, is only another expression of that reality, which is consciousness or existence itself, aware of itself. And matter is then another expression of consciousness at different levels of evolution, so that one can look at reality as being composed of an innumerable number of levels of reality, each level having its corresponding level of consciousness. And reality is perceived by those who are experiencing it only on the level of their own evolution of the nervous system. The mechanism in the physical body that perceives reality is the nervous system itself. And so, as a biomedical engineer, this is what Ben specialized in, he became interested in studying the effects of changes in consciousness on physiology. And I must say that Ben, whenever he talked about these matters, never claimed this to be any sort of ultimate teaching. He spoke about this as a working model. And he would say, "I speak from my present level of ignorance, because ignorance grows exponentially. The more questions you ask and the more answers you get, the more questions there are to ask. So it's an unending process of unfoldment of consciousness." And Ben saw reality, or I should say reality unfolded itself to him in the form of structure. because he dealt with mechanisms. To someone else with another background, reality would reveal itself in terms of, let's say, poetic metaphor or vibrations of different sounds to a musician, so that we all are like snowflakes, all similar, yet all different. And the subtitles of his two books actually indicate that reality appeared to him in terms of structure, because the subtitles are on the mechanics of consciousness and on the mechanics of creation. So Ben has designed instruments to study these physiological changes that occur in the body when a certain energy rises through the spine. In the East, it's called Kundalini or coiled serpent. It rises up the spine and awakens certain energies in the body, which allow perception to become broader, and the brain functions then on a different level. He called it his model of Kundalini. Ben looked at reality as being driven by the force of evolution to infinity as consciousness unfolds itself. So in this graph, this arrow would represent the energy of evolution. And the bell curve, so-called, is a method to show graphically statistical data. And if the peak of this curve represents the average level of consciousness of humanity now, and the lower end of it shows the lowest level of consciousness, let's say the mafia types, as he used to put it, then the cutting edge here, the highest edge, would be individuals such as Einstein or Leonardo da Vinci. Now, as evolution pushes this ahead, some years from now, this bell curve will assume this position. So what will happen? That the average consciousness will be where the advanced consciousness is today. The low level will be where the average is today. And the high consciousness of humanity at that time will be something that we can hardly imagine. Because as he used to say, the potential of the human nervous system is enormous. And we really don't know where it's taking us, from humanhood to godhood. And this chart shows an experiment that he did with a subject sitting on a chair that had a device attached to it called ballistograph. And the ballistograph is something that picks up micro vibrations of the body. So the large curve that you see reflects the motion up and down of the subject as the breathing occurs. And then the small wiggly lines superimposed on that indicate the heartbeat. The lower part of the chart shows the same individual in a state of deep meditation, which also means deep relaxation. And look what happened. The breathing is practically gone. It's a straight line. And what was a disrupted pattern of the heartbeat has turned into a regular sine wave. And looking at this as an engineer, Ben said, this is an effect of harmonization of all the frequencies within the body, and the body is now resonating like a tuned instrument. And he came up with what he called the Kundalini syndrome model. In other words, when this energy in the spine rises, the harmony occurs where the vibration turns into the sine wave at 7 cycles per second, or 7 hertz, as compared to the regular disrupted pattern. And as an engineer, he looked at the body in terms of vibrating systems or oscillators. And in this case, there are 5: the heart aorta system, the brain itself, a cavity in the brain which is filled with fluid, a ventricle, and then the brain itself, the sensory cortex, and then all this results in an electromagnetic field around the head. A system which comes into harmony within itself becomes more powerful than others, and it will entrain, this is another term he used, it will entrain or pull after itself a system that is out of harmony. So once this oscillator or resonating system comes into harmony, it will trigger the rest one after the other. It's a domino effect. So as the heart pumps blood through the aorta, and he called the aorta the biggest plumbing in the body. So it's a tremendous impact on the body, and it shakes the body so that it vibrates. It hits the bifurcation into the legs, and a certain plane wave is reflected up. The next pulse comes down, and the plane wave and the pulse clash, and it creates a disruption in the body. When the harmonious 7 hertz vibration is set up, it seems that the heart and the lungs begin to talk to each other, and they begin to work in harmony, so that a pulse comes down and waits for the reflection to come up, and they both go up together, and then the next pulse comes down, and there is no clash occurring anymore, and the body goes into resonance, triggering the next oscillator, which is the brain. And looking at the head again from the point of view of engineering, it's a rigid box resting on a resilient column, which is the spine. What happens is, as the body goes up and down, the skull is vibrated, and the brain, which is a gel-like substance, is floating in a fluid, the cerebrospinal fluid, so that each time the body goes up, it's hitting the skull and then goes down, and so up and down it goes, and it creates a plane wave within the brain. The brain has a characteristic called piezoelectric, which means that when it's stimulated mechanically, it develops an electromagnetic field around it, which is this field right here eventually. So this is the second oscillator, which triggers the third. This is the fluid filled cavity in the brain called ventricle. And due to this regular vibration of 7 cycles or 7 hertz per second, a standing wave is created, is established in the ventricle, which again creates a very harmonious frequency. And this in turn triggers the sensory cortex. This is a cross-section of the brain. And this is a cross-section of the third ventricle filled with fluid. On top of the third ventricle is a drum-like surface with a bundle of nerve fiber crossing it, which connects the right and left brain hemispheres. And this is very important because as the fluid vibrates harmoniously, it activates this nerve fiber, and it harmonizes the 2 brain hemispheres. And we know that consciousness opens up when the synchronization of the functioning of the 2 hemispheres occurs. And then a certain current is established in the sensory cortex in the lobe of the brain. And as I said before, all this results in an electromagnetic field around the head, so that the head actually becomes an antenna capable of sending out and receiving information which it could not do otherwise. And in that state, higher perceptions become possible. And this was Ben's theory, that through the mechanism of Kundalini and the resonant state of the body, higher perceptions become available. This is an illustration of the sympathetic resonance, how those oscillators trigger each other. If you pluck the strings of this violin, then the strings on this one will resonate without being touched. And this is how the oscillators relate to each other through resonance. And so, as we walk on this planet Earth, which is charged negatively, by the way, we are bathed in a sea of vibrations of all kinds of electromagnetic fields and all kinds of frequencies, radio and others. And the ionosphere is charged positively, and the potential between the two is constantly fluctuating, so that we are subjected to all sorts of influences all the time. But in that state of resonance at 7 hertz, we plug into the vibration of the earth itself, which is stable, and it happens to be the same 7 cycles per second, so that this biosphere around the earth resonates at the same frequency, and we get locked into the frequency of the planet itself. And this is why the meditative state is such a relaxing state that some people find it difficult to come out of. Now, having become part of the vibration of the earth, we then in turn plug into the vibration of the entire solar system, because our earth here is shown surrounded by all kinds of vibrations as well. There is the magnetopause, magnetosphere, plasma sheet, you name it, trapped radiation. There are acoustical waves, the solar wind coming from the sun, which is also affecting the earth. So that having tuned into the frequency of the earth, we in turn tune into the frequency of the entire solar system and the sun, and so on into the cosmos. This is the cosmic connection. As Ben measured these fields around the body, he found that at that frequency of 7 hertz, the field around the body expands the energy that can be measured, and it extends to about 20 inches and tapers off. In a situation where there were hundreds of people meditating at the same time, Ben conducted an experiment because many of these individuals reported hearing inner sounds inside their heads. So when he measured the frequencies of the sounds that they heard, he found that there was one major sound and then other peaks where many people heard certain frequencies. And as he looked at this, and of course this is in kilohertz, as he looked at this, he realized that these other peaks are really the harmonics of the initial sound. In other words, everybody is really hearing one sound, but then it breaks up into harmonics, and some people hear entire chords. It really varies depending on one's evolution. This is how the third ventricle actually looks in the brain, and this is the cross-section of it that we spoke about. And on the brain, there is a narrow band called the sensory cortex. When stimulated mechanically with a needle, for example, during operations, it creates sensations in different parts of the body, and the sensations are laid out in this pattern, and this is called the homunculus, or the little man. And as you notice, the toes are inside the fold of the brain, and then the hip, the hand, and so on. The internal organs are here. So usually the signal goes to the sensory cortex and back to the motor system, telling the body what to do, how to react to the stimulus. But what happens in the Kundalini process, that this circuit becomes activated, and one begins to experience certain parts of the body spontaneously without them being actually stimulated physically. So one doesn't really know, is it happening in the brain or is it happening on the physical level? So eventually, as this current, and he really called it not a current, but an alignment of neurons due to the stimulation of the fiber here, the nerve fiber across the brain, this alignment eventually becomes a permanent situation, so that one's range of perceptions is tremendously expanded. And another thing that happens is that this current or alignment goes also through the pleasure centers, so that actually a person in this state is in a state of bliss, and a yogi sitting in a cave in Himalayas is actually having a lot of fun. So nobody's forcing them to sit for days on end cross-legged. And as Ben said, you can speed up the process of evolution, but we're all on this conveyor belt, and nature is carrying us along, and we will get there anyway, from humanhood to godhood, whether we like it or not. So eventually, as this current continues, starts at the toe and goes up around the body, and it opens up certain energy centers in the body known as chakras. And eventually the current begins to go round and round, and its function is to clear the body of stress so that it can actually perceive higher realities. And if there is a blockage anywhere, it will keep pushing through that until it's cleared so that it can actually go further. And some people can experience great discomfort because of that and not understanding what the mechanism is. And Ben wanted actually to inform the medical community, particularly the psychiatric community, about the phenomenon so that certain symptoms would not be misdiagnosed sometimes as they are as schizophrenia or actually some physical illness, which it is not. Certainly, this mechanism and this phenomenon was known in antiquity, and this pharaoh is saying, my status symbol is this, that my kundalini has risen to the center in the forehead. And in this painting, it's being said, again, it's all coded in these graphic patterns. This is saying, my kundalini has reached this level and has gone even beyond the pharaohs. So this knowledge really was quite universal. Now we will continue, and we will look at the way Ben looked at reality. Because what is it that gives us our reality? And it was described in his book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum, on the Mechanics of Consciousness. And I will talk later why he used the pendulum as the symbol of what he was talking about. We are dealing with two realities. One is this physical, solid reality that we get blue and black marks from, as he said, when we bump into it. But the information about it is given us by our senses. So that is our subjective reality. And so the two really are giving us the totality of our environment. So what is the objective physical reality? And let us look at the atom. If we magnify the atom and zero in on the electron, and now we think now we will get the answer to what physical matter is. But if we analyze the electron, all we find is an oscillating electromagnetic field. There's no physical matter as such. So we think, well, maybe the nucleus will give us the answer. And we zero in on the nucleus, and we find that it too is only an electromagnetic oscillating field in the void, because between the nucleus and the electron and outside of them, there is nothing but void, the same void that fills in the interstellar space. And the ratio of the distance between the nucleus and the electron would be analogous to a head of a pin in the middle of this room and something rotating around it 30 feet away, and the rest is void. So what is physical matter? Ben drew an analogy between the electron and the pendulum by looking at the cross-section, as it were, of the atom and comparing it to reciprocal motion. In other words, we see the electron now on this side, now on the other side of the nucleus, which would be the pendulum motion. So what happens in the pendulum? It stops, it moves, stops, and moves again. In other words, it's action and rest, action and rest. If you took an actual pendulum and would swing it and attach a pen to it, and you would draw a piece of paper under it like this, it would describe a sine wave. Here the pendulum moved and stopped, moved and stopped. And reality really are the spaces between the points of rest. We perceive reality when there is motion. And reality is really nothing but oscillating fields in the void. And the reason I can touch this screen and I don't go through the floor is because my atoms, or the electrons of my atoms, are actually repelling the electrons of the floor. But if I would speed up my vibration, then I could very well go through the floor. So that it's the interaction between the atoms in this reality that gives us the illusion of solid matter. So how do we get information about this solid physical reality? It is through our senses, through the subjective reality. So let's look at that. How does the neuron work? If this is a neuron, and this is the baseline when the neuron is at rest, when it's stimulated by something, and it doesn't care whether it's a loud noise or a bright light, it simply says, ouch, I'm being disturbed. So the more such spikes you have on the baseline, the more intense the stimulus. But somehow through a miracle of our physiology, our brain can construct our reality out of these spikes that simply indicate a stimulation of the nervous system. And we see beautiful flowers and animals and the sky and so forth. And as we know, our senses are very inadequate. They're very limited and imperfect. Even bees, for example, can perceive ultraviolet light, and dogs can hear the ultrasonic. So that we see reality through our senses only through a very narrow slot. And the rest is really unknown to us. And so we're looking at the physical objective reality, which is oscillating, as we saw, through another system, our subjective reality, through our nervous system, which also perceives it through action, rest and action and rest and action and rest. So one oscillating system is looking at another oscillating system, and the picture is very blurred indeed. We can extend our realities through instruments, telescopes and microscopes, but in the final analysis, it is only our senses that give us the knowledge. So our subjective reality then is the sum of impressions conveyed by our senses, coded in periods of action and rest, which are oscillating electrical states of the nervous system. And we're constantly comparing one thing to another. Otherwise, we would not perceive reality. For example, if the muscle of the eye is anesthetized, then we do not see anything because the eye needs to scan all the time in order to see something. So both realities become real due to a change occurring between two states of rest. When there is change, there is motion, and when there is no change and a total state of rest, then reality, as far as we are concerned, disappears because we cannot perceive it. So let's look at the overall picture. Here is the atom, and it can be represented as a sine wave of motion and rest, which is analogous to the motion of the pendulum. Now, let us take a hypothetical situation where we are taking a wavelength, let's say a red photon, which has a very large amplitude. The distances between the points of rest are very far apart. And then we take the same, let's say 1 inch, in other words, the same unit of frequencies, and we speed them up so that within the same length we have maybe more ups and downs, and let's say it's a violet photon, and then the points of rest get a little closer together, but we get more of them within that span. Then we speed it up even more, let's say the gamma rays or X-rays, and we see that we get even more spikes and or waves, and they get even closer together. Now, let us imagine a hypothetical situation where the speed has become so fast that it's become infinite. At infinite speed, there will be no more oscillation, and the points of rest will in fact overlap, and you would get a straight line. Now, what kind of state would that be? First of all, we see that it's a paradox because the infinite speed now has become total rest. We could probably call it the state of the absolute. It's the source out of which all the frequencies arise. And it will also have the maximum energy. All energy is in it, but it's all in a potential state. And when it begins to vibrate, then it creates all these different frequencies which begin to interact, as we saw before, creating our reality. So one could summarize this by saying the absolute is the point where extremes merge, and a state of rest implies infinite speed. In fact, they become one and the same. And this state, the absolute state, is the substrate for all reality which emerges out of it. In particle physics, there is a principle of uncertainty which was formulated by Heisenberg, and it says, when the momentum or the speed of a particle is known, its position becomes unknowable. The more we know about one, the less we know about the other. Applied to the pendulum, what does it give us? When the pendulum stops before it reverses direction, we do know its speed because it's 0. And then it stops again and we know its speed again. So that means that at those points, its location becomes unknowable. And as Ben said, it can be found anywhere in the universe. That is, it becomes the universe. It fills all creation. It is everywhere. And based on this, he developed much of his further thinking. If this is our solid reality, and like a pendulum, we oscillate and we take off every now and then, and we touch that absolute state of total rest, but it happens so fast that we're not even aware of it, and we come back as if nothing had happened. But suppose we can expand that state and experience it, and in fact we can, then this is what will happen. Here is our reality, and here is the other reality, which we now have expanded, and we can be conscious on that level simultaneously with this level, so that we can actually have the benefit of both, and we can explore that reality and bring back the information. And this is in fact what Ben did, and the information that I will be talking about from now on was received in those states of expanded consciousness.